So, if you guys aren't familiar with the Colorado River is actually one of the most interesting rivers I've ever found. The Colorado River, for starters, is actually 90 feet deep, which is equivalent to 3 school buses on top of each other, like vertical. And as far as how long the river is, it's 1,440 miles long, which is equivalent to 4 football fields. And what's even crazier about this river is that right next to it is a full, just like a road that you can drive on, and there's no protection, there's no railing. So it's very easy for you to just swerve a little bit, and then now you're 90 feet deep into water. So because there's a road right there, it's very easy for your car to easily just slip off the side of the road and then go straight 90 feet deep into, I didn't even mention this, the Colorado River is the third biggest river in all of the US, and there's again just no railing, very easy to just go in there. And although the Colorado River is very deep, there is some more shallow parts of the river. So if you were to crash your car into the more shallow parts of the river, it really wouldn't go into the water completely. It would more just kind of bobble at the top. And on the night of February 28th, 2021, that is exactly what would happen to 19-year-old Brian Cohee. He would be calling the police this night saying that he had accidentally crashed his car into the river, and it wasn't in the more deeper sides, it was actually in a more shallow part, kind of next to a boat ramp. And so when police would report to the scene, they would find 19-year-old Brian sitting in a black SUV with his father, also named Brian. And since their names are both Brian, I know that's going to get confusing. So I'm just going to call 19-year-old Brian, Brian, and then just refer to his dad as Brian's dad. So they see Brian in a black SUV with his dad, and then outside of the car is Brian's mom, Terry, who immediately starts talking to police. So Terry starts explaining to the police that earlier that night they had gotten a call from their son Brian saying he had crashed his car into a more shallow part of the Colorado River. So his parents showed up, they looked at the car, they realized that they could not tow it out, and then that's when they called the police, wondering if maybe the police could try and get in contact with a tow truck company. But mind you, at this point, it is 3 in the morning when the police get this call. So when they're trying to call all of these tow truck companies, no one is picking up, and also nobody wants to get up in the middle of the night, because if they were to get his car out of the river, the tow truckers would literally have to get in the water, February in Colorado, freezing cold water, and dig this car out of the river. So nobody really wanted to do that, so nobody was really picking up. But in the meantime, the police tried to get a statement from Brian, basically asking him how he crashed and what happened. And the entire time, Brian's mom, Brian's dad, and even Brian himself are just kind of laughing through everything. They seem very okay with it, even though it is a very scary situation. He literally could have died and plummeted 90 feet into the river, but for some reason they're just very lighthearted, they're just laughing. And then that's when Brian goes on to tell the story that he had left the house because he felt like he needed to clear his head. And then as he was going on his nightly drive, that's when he stopped at the Colorado River. Brian goes on to say that he's actually the owner of the life jacket safety program that is held in that area, and they have a specific boat ramp where they're able to go off into the river and teach people the safeties of wearing life jackets. And this specific boat ramp Brian knew very well, and so he said that he just wanted to park on the boat ramp to just kind of look out at the river. And if you guys actually don't know what a boat ramp is, it's basically a little ramp that they will have at boat docks to basically, if you were to have your boat hitched onto the back of your car, you could slowly reverse onto this ramp so that your boat kind of flows into the river instead of just slapping into the river. And so he said that when he parked on this boat ramp, he said that he was out there for a little while. And then when he got back in his car, he turned on his car and went to reverse to go back up the ramp. But his car wasn't going up the ramp. It just kept going down. And so it kept going down until it eventually crashed. His whole car filled up with water. And then his pants were soaked. He ran out the car. And then that's when he said that there was a car going past that saw the whole thing. So they pulled off to the side of the road, they helped him out, and so Brian was able to use this bystander's phone to call his parents, and then his parents called the police. And even while the police are talking to Brian while he's in this black SUV with his dad, he's actually wearing no pants. He's just covering himself with a coat because he said that his pants got really wet when his whole car filled up with water, so he took off his pants real quick, and so he wasn't wearing any pants at that time. And as I said, the entire time, they seem to just be laughing, telling jokes, kind of being very lighthearted about the whole thing. Even the police officers, they were also making jokes as well.
I'm really cold. Is it okay if it's in here?
Because it's fine.
Okay,
That's fine. I did not know that. No, please stay in the car. Yeah. All right. Nobody else in the car?
Nope.
No,
Okay.
no, just us. I'm the father. That's the mother. And this is our son. He just called us 20 minutes ago and said, "Dad, I parked at the boat ramp and I messed up. I tried to get out of the car and it slid down."
Well, you're not hurt, right? You're okay?
No, just a little
Okay.
cold is all.
Just beside your pride a little bit?
And probably $7,000.
Okay. All right, man. Do you have your ID with you, driver's license by any chance?
Thankfully,
What were you doing down here, bud?
well, I felt like I needed to get out, and I figured, why not park here and just
relax a little bit?
relax and think.
Okay.
And I parked on the boat ramp,
Okay.
and I thought it would be easy to get out.
Uh-huh.
But when I tried to,
Where did you park exactly? Were you down the hill a little
Oh,
bit?
yeah, just a little bit.
Okay.
And then
When he got back in, go ahead.
when I got back in, I tried to put it in drive, and it didn't go up. So then I tried putting it in low gear, shimmying it a bit. That didn't work.
And so while Brian was telling his story actually changed mid while he was talking to the police officer. He at first said that he had parked into the boat ramp with the front of his car facing the water, and then he switched his story and said that the front of his car was actually facing away from the water. So at this point, it's taking a while for the police to get a hold of any tow truck companies. And so that's when Brian's parents take Brian home so that he can shower, put on some pants, and then his parents went back to the boat ramp. And when they did, that's when they saw a tow truck had finally came and was pulling Brian's car out of the water. But as the police were pulling this car out the water, they noticed that on the back bumper, kind of underneath the trunk, there seemed to be a big red stain. And so that's when the police go to Brian's parents and show them, I don't know if you can see, but on the bumper, it looks like there's a lot of red, like a red substance. Do you think maybe Brian had hurt himself trying to get out the car? And then maybe at the time his adrenaline was so high so that he didn't really maybe notice that he hurt himself. And so after this, his parents get really concerned. So Terry, Brian's mom, calls Brian immediately and asks him, "Hey, are you okay? Did you get hurt?" And he's like, "No, there's nothing wrong." And then that's when Terry says, "Well, they saw blood on the trunk of your car. Where did that come from?" And then Brian kind of goes quiet and he just says, "Oh, that's weird. That shouldn't be there. I don't know what that is." So they were able to tow Brian's car home, and then the next morning, that's when Brian's parents brought Brian out into the garage and showed him on his car this red stain. And when Brian saw it, that's when he told his parents, "Oh, that is actually a red stain from some fake blood that I had in the trunk of my car for a special effects class I'm doing." So his parents were like, "Okay, that does make sense. He is in special effects, so that, would make sense." And so after this, they kind of just left it alone until later on that day, Brian's dad decided to clean out Brian's car because he wanted to take it into the shop just to see if his car was still usable. And so he started to clean out the car. He checked the trunk and there was nothing. And so he went to the back seat, cleaned it out, and it was completely clean. And then he got to the passenger side. And as he's cleaning that, that's when he discovers between the seat seat and the actual door was a brown wallet. And when he opened it up, it belonged to a man named Warren Barnes. And this kind of striked, Brian's dad, because Warren Barnes is an older man in his 50s. So he sees this and he's like, oh my God, whose is this? And then he starts to look farther into the car, and that's when Brian's dad opens up the middle compartment, and it is of course filled with water. But in that middle compartment, floating around, he would see a large kitchen knife as well as 3 pairs of rubber gloves. So when Brian's dad sees the knife, sees the gloves, sees this random man's wallet, he's starting to, get a little anxious. And so he opens up the wallet and he notices that in the wallet there's a card, like a work card for a company called People Ready. And so he decides to call the company, and when he does, he gets in contact with the manager and he says, I actually have the wallet of one of your employees, I think. Like, is there a way that I could give it back to him? And then that's when the manager at People Ready said, oh my God, that's crazy, you found his wallet. He actually never showed up to work this morning. We had to file a missing persons report just a while ago, but where did you find his wallet? And that's when Brian's dad said that he found the wallet on the boat ramp by the Colorado River. And so now Brian's dad is starting to piece together the wallet, the gloves, the knife, and now he finds out that this man is missing. So the woman later comes by to pick up the wallet, and that's when Brian's dad confronts Brian and asks him, do you know who this guy is? Because I found his wallet in your car. But Brian continues to say that he doesn't know where it came from. Like maybe it belonged to a friend of his, and then maybe the wallet fell out of their pocket. So going back to the woman that picked up the wallet, she picked up the wallet, and then that's when she reported back to the boat ramp where she met with police and talked about Warren. And that's when the woman told the police that Warren worked at People Ready and his shift started every single day at 6 a.m. And he has never missed a 6 a.m. shift in 4 years. And this was the first time in 4 years that he didn't show up for work, he didn't show up for his shift, and then he also didn't call anyone, and then no one could also get in contact with him. And for People Ready, Warren actually loved to read books, and so sometimes he would read books to the children that would come by. So while the police are taking down their stories, that's when the women leave while the police investigate the rest of the area. And so there was this one specific under passageway. It was kind of like a bridge very close by the Colorado River. It was under a main road. So they start looking underneath this bridge because Warren was actually homeless. And so sometimes he used to sleep underneath bridges and benches. And so they were just kind of checking around there. Maybe he dropped his wallet on the way to walking under the bridge. And so they started going over there looking around. And that is when one of the officers in the distance sees a human leg lying on the ground. A little farther away from the leg is where they found just a forearm. So it seemed like the arm had been cut at the hands and the elbow. And then a little bit farther from that was another part of an arm, but this time it was the arm cut at the elbow, cut at the shoulder. And then a little bit farther from that was the torso and legs of this man that was still attached to his body. He had a big slash on his stomach, so his insides were showing, and there were a lot of angry stab marks and slashes all over his legs. And so once police discover all of this, that's when they immediately call in crime scene investigators to identify this man.
Here. Yeah, because there's an arm. There's an arm, there's another arm, there's another one.
So going back to Brian in this part of the story, Brian, as for him as a person, he was a very quiet young teenager. He had recently just graduated high school a year prior, but had been known to have a lot of behavioral issues. He used to love to get a rile out of people. He loved to get a reaction, and so he would try to do things purposely to make people irritated or angry so that they would pay attention to him. He also had a very small group of friends, and a lot of his friends would say that he had very dark humor, and sometimes whenever he made jokes, it was very rarely ever not about someone either dying or murdering or something violent. And on Brian's social, he was mostly frequent on Reddit, where he went under the username that_stinky_boy. And he would frequently reply to a specific subreddit called r/casual llama. And the description of the subreddit is, quote, "The casual version of r/IMA. Anyone's welcome to host or participate in an AMA. Topics may involve anything from ordinary to extraordinary subject matters. The environment is relaxed. We just ask you to have fun." And on the subreddit, Brian would often talk about his views of the world. Like this one Reddit comment that he had made in response to a person asking a question of, if you had the option to have power over the world or no power over the world, which would you choose? And this was Brian's response to that. He said, quote, "Well, my ideologies vary quite greatly. It would greatly depend whether or not I would be a citizen or a government official. If I was a citizen, I would prefer a conservative/Republican/right-wing system with few to no restrictions on citizens. The government is a removed entity in day-to-day life, completely free speech, complete economic freedom, social freedom, freedom in the media, etc. Much more borderline anarchist. But if I was a government official, I would much prefer a conservative/Republican/right-wing system with more control over my citizens, much more control in my hands over the economy, laws, people, media, etc. Much more borderline authoritarian." So basically, it sounds like no matter what, Brian just wants to be in control. Like if he was a citizen, he would completely rebel against the government because he's not going to let the government tell him what to do. But then if he was a part of the government, then he would control the citizens because the citizens aren't going to tell him what to do. On his Reddit page, he would also open up about a lot of his mental issues, like this one Reddit post saying, quote, "I have a counselor, but he assigned me to someone else because I was beyond his skill set. I'm also going to get a neuropsychological evaluation because of my irresponsibility. I can't really use any of my friends for support because they'd make fun of me." He would even respond to a photo on Reddit where it was a photo of an article, and the article read, quote, "Cop tried to shoot his dog for barking, but accidentally shot himself instead." And Brian's response to that was, quote, "r/justice served." And this response would actually be quite ironic later on. He would also go on a lot of rants on his Reddit page, saying things like he became very paranoid of his friends, where now he has to keep a knife around him all the time. And this was actually backed up by Brian's father later on when he was in interrogation. He had said that he found a knife in Brian's room before, and when he asked Brian why did he have a knife in his room, that's when Brian told him that he doesn't trust any of his friends, so he needs to keep a knife around him. And Brian would soon become very paranoid about the world. He started to feel like everyone was out to get him, and that the same way that he has free will to hurt someone also has the free will to hurt him back. And so he always has to be on edge all the time. And he would also say that none of his friends really cared about him, and they were probably just all going to ditch him after high school anyways. And he also went on to say that if he ever died or if something ever happened to him, none of his friends would probably come to see him. And so at this point, that is actually when the police were able to get DNA back from all of the body parts found underneath the bridge, and it unfortunately did come up as the body of Warren Barnes. Now, at this point, you can start to tell that there's little bits and pieces of what we know. We definitely know Brian did something because Warren comes up dead and his wallet is in Brian's car. There's also blood on his car, a knife in his car, there's gloves. He has always had an interest in violence and dark humor. There's certain things about this story that kind of point to Brian, but what exactly did Brian do? And unfortunately, what Brian actually did wouldn't come to light until the very next day after he crashed his car on March 1st, 2021, when the police would receive a phone call from Brian's mother.
911 is John. What's the address emergency?
Hi, there is an emergency. I found something in my son's closet wrapped in a plastic bag.
Okay, what was it?
I think it's a human head.
It's a what?
I think it's a human head.
Why do you think it's that?
Because it looks like I saw an ear.
Is it bloody or does it like anything like that?
Can you just come? Do I have to take a picture and send it to you?
Is your son there now?
He just pulled up. We wanted to make sure he was here before we called.
How old is he?
19. He's had a little bit of a fascination with the morbid, but he was channeling it, I thought, into becoming a crime scene investigator, but not so much.
Do you think he's going to be cooperative with us?
I don't know. I don't think he'll be violent. Just came back from his friend's house.
Does he have any weapons in his room, or do you guys have any in the house?
I don't know. I think that he has a shotgun, but we can certainly remove it immediately before he gets in his room. He's out by the car now, so.
Is the bag still in the closet?
No, it's in my kitchen sink. And there's a secondary bag that I have not opened. It's currently covered with a towel.
And there's a second bag?
There's a second bag that I don't know what's in it. I didn't open it.
Now, at the time, Terry was actually the owner of her own daycare, but she actually ran that daycare out of her own home. So she had converted the entire basement part of her house into a daycare where Monday through Friday, people would drop off her kids, and she had coloring supplies in there. She had Brian's brother who actually worked with Terry. He would help out down there. And at parts during the day, if Terry needed to go upstairs to maybe do a quick task like clean all the dishes that the kids just used, pick up some trash, do a little bit of laundry, it would be fine because Brian's brother was down there to kind of take over with the kids. And so on this specific day, on March 1st, that's when Terry would go upstairs, kind of do a little bit of laundry, and she went to go put some laundry into Brian's room. But when she opened up his closet, she was immediately met with this putrid smell, and she just was like, what is that? And then she looks down, and that's when she discovers 2 big garbage bags, and she realizes that the smell is coming from those garbage bags. And so the first one that she opened was actually double bagged, and so when she opened up the first bag, it had maggots all in it. So she immediately picked up the bag, both of them, and she put them in the sink because she didn't know, maybe it was old food or something. And so then when she finally put the bag in the sink and opened up the second bag, that is when she would discover the head of Warren Barnes. Immediately when she discovered the head, she was in shock, and the first thing she did was call her husband. She didn't really tell him what was going on yet. She just said that she needed him home right away because something had happened, and so he immediately left work and drove home. So then after getting off the phone with her husband, she immediately called all of the child's parents and said that there was a family emergency and they all needed to pick up their kids. And so within 30 minutes, all of the kids were picked up. And then after that, that is when Terry told Brian's brother what was going on, because at the time, Brian wasn't home. He was actually staying with his friend Kylan, aka Kai. So he was at her house at this time. And as I said, Brian doesn't have a car right now. So in order to get around, he was actually borrowing his brother's car. And that's when Terry tells Brian's brother what she just found. And that's when she told him, you need to text Brian and say that you need your car back so that he comes home right now. So then that's exactly what he did. Brian's brother texts Brian, hey, do you mind like coming home soon? I need my car. I want to go out later. And I'm assuming Brian had a really bad feeling about this because Kai said that when Brian got this text, he immediately got up and left the house, like barely said bye to anyone. He just zoomed out of the house and he actually peeled out of the driveway so fast that Kai took a picture of like tire tracks on her driveway with how fast he was whipping out of there. Once Brian actually got to the house, at this time, Brian's mom, dad, and brother were all outside of the house, and they were just kind of talking to him and keeping him occupied. They weren't letting him back into the house. They were just kind of, talking to him until the police eventually did pull up.
How much?
Cooperate? I am going to cooperate.
Okay, so parents have some concerns of some stuff they may have found in your room?
Yeah, I believe so.
And what would it be?
A human head and hands.
Do you have anything on you that's going to cut, poke, hurt, stick me anything without reaching for nothing? Don't reach for nothing.
My phone and my wallet, that's
okay.
it.
Well, I'm going to have you face that way. Put your hands on top of your head for me real quick. I just want to make sure you interlace your fingers for me real quick, all right?
I covered it with the towel.
Okay.
I didn't want him to see it because we didn't want him to run. I don't want to look at it.
Yeah. Just sit back there and hang out for me, okay?
How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you? You said your name's Brian?
Yeah. I'm not feeling too well.
You're not feeling too well? All right.
No, these past few days I've been very, very anxious.
That's understandable.
And even on the way to the station, Brian was looking outside, and when they passed the bridge where Warren's body was found, that's when Brian would just randomly say, quote, "It was under this bridge," and the officer that was driving just said nothing. So once the police officially arrested Brian, that's when they also brought in Brian's parents. And the first person the police interrogated was Brian's mother, since she was the very first person to discover the head.
A white plastic trash bag. And I was like, what in the world does he have in here? And I picked it up and it was heavy. And I held it in my hands and I was like, what in the world is this? What in the world? Is it like maggots covering something? Or I don't know. I better take it in the sink. So I carried it out to the sink, and it was double bagged. So I ripped open one bag, and I saw an old blood. Okay. And I went, I ripped open the second bag, and it was all his head. It's so beautiful.
And in Terry's interrogation, he would actually go on to say that Brian has experienced violent tendencies in the past. Like there was this one time a couple months back where he had discovered Brian's kit, where in that kit, it was basically filled with knives, hammers, shovels, zip ties, duct tape, and saws. And when his parents found this, that's when his parents basically gave Brian the ultimatum that if he doesn't throw it out, they're going to call the police and the police will probably throw it out for him. And so Brian ended up taking his kit and throwing it out. And so as far as Brian's interrogation, he is very upfront the entire time. Like he is so honest with the police. Any question they have, he just honestly answers it.
Begin and go slow and tell me as many details as you can remember.
So, because Murray going to jail for the 15 years probably.
I have no idea.
Because
we're at the beginning.
It's murder. I'm going to jail for 20 probably, but so I figured, why fight it?
Okay.
So Brian goes on to explain the night of the murder, and he said that this was actually something he had been planning for a while, murdering someone. And he said that he specifically wanted someone who was homeless so that he thought that the police wouldn't try and look for them. And so he would go on nightly drives about once every 2 weeks to basically scan the area and try to find victims. And on February 27th, 2021 is when Brian came across Warren, who was sleeping underneath the bridge. Brian said that when he saw him in the distance, he saw just like someone sleeping in a sleeping bag, and it was zipped all the way up so that he couldn't really see the person. And so that's when Brian parked his car right next to the bridge. And then in his car, he actually had a navy blue one-piece jumpsuit as well as a Michael Myers mask. And if you guys have ever seen Michael Myers, he wears a long navy blue one-piece jumpsuit. And so after he puts on the mask, after he puts on the jumpsuit, that's when he takes the knife out of his car. He puts on 3 pairs of gloves. So he puts 1 pair of glove, like, so 2 sets, I guess, on one hand, and he put that on his left hand, and then on his right hand, he put 2 pairs of gloves. So technically 4 gloves. And he said that he wanted more protection on his dominant hand rather than his non-dominant hand. And so once he did that, that's when he walked over to Warren, and he basically sat on top of him and started to stab him through the sleeping bag. And eventually that's when he unzipped the sleeping bag and continued to stab him in the neck. And even when Brian is talking about this, there's one part in the interrogation where he even mocks the screams of Warren when Brian was killing him.
He was panicking at first in his old man voice. He was in his 50s. I know why I call him old man. He was saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why? Ah!" And I just kept on stabbing his neck. Is it okay if I do a demonstration?
Oh, yeah.
This is him. I was straddled on top of him like this.
Okay.
And he couldn't fight back. It was actually surprisingly easy. I was barely breaking a sweat. I thought, oh, this guy, he's going to be tough. But no, it was actually surprisingly easy.
So then he said that he had probably stabbed Warren about 30 to 40 times. And so Brian said that he was mostly focusing on Warren's neck. And he said that once he was done stabbing him, Warren's head was halfway off of his body. And so at this point, that's when Brian decided to sever the head. And then he severed the arm from elbow to hand. And then he cut off the other hand, cut off the forearm, cut off the top of his arm, as well as cutting off both of his hands. He placed both of Warren's hands into Ziploc baggies and put them in his car. He also placed Warren's head inside of an old pizza box and also placed that in his car. But before placing all of the parts into his car, he actually took pictures of it on his phone, to which the police were able to retrieve all of these deleted photos and see the pictures that Brian had taken that night. So he said that he put them into his car, and then after that he came back, he cut off the forearm, cut off the top of his arm, and then he started to play with his body. So that's when Brian says that he started to make slashes on his legs just to, quote, watch the blood flow. And then that's when he made a huge slash across Warren's stomach in order to see his insides. When Brian's friend Kai was interviewed, she said that she had known Brian for the past couple years and always known him to be a person that had very dark sense of humor. But on top of being, someone with a dark sense of humor, he was also very hateful and spiteful towards others. Like, Kai had a friend named Amber who was a curvier girl, and Brian would straight up just call her fat into her face or call her a pig, which, Kai did not like. She thought that that was really mean. And he would also say that to a bunch of other people. He would also be on the bus and just shout out random slurs and the disgusting, most violent of things, literally just to get a reaction out of people, so people look at him and pay attention to him. So going back to the actual crime, once Brian placed his head and his hands into his car, that's when Brian basically just left the body parts underneath the bridge, and then he drove back home. He placed the head into double garbage bags, same thing with the hands, placed both of those into his closet, and then he washed the one-piece jumpsuit as well as the mask. And when police were actually able to gain access into Brian's computer, they would find some really odd searches in his computer, such as, quote, homicidal thoughts every day, quote, homicidal ideation, quote, how to cope with murderous thoughts. And these things were looked up just 2 weeks before the murder. He would also have other searches on his computer, such as, quote, schizoid and paranoid personality disorder, extreme paranoia, avoidant personality. And during this time, he was also big on researching serial killers. And so he would frequently research things like, quote, Unabomber, bombs, how do people react to a home invasion? How do people react to being held at knife point? How deadly is a neck stab wound? And other knife-related searches. Brian would also say that he was a big fan of a lot of serial killers, and one specific serial killer that he kept bringing up was a man named Ed Kemper, who was a man that would, like Brian, take nightly drives, but Ed Kemper ended up murdering 6 young women. And Brian said that he compared himself to Ed because on his nightly drives, Brian's nightly drives, he would often see women jogging by themselves or walking by themselves, and the reason why he never did anything is because he actually did have a love for women, but he also felt like how Ed Kemper did, which was, quote, half of me wanted to treat the girl nice and take her out, but the other half of me wanted to see what her head looked like on a stick. And in high school, Brian was also diagnosed with ADHD and autism and was also asked to get further psychosis and psychiatric evaluations. But unfortunately, all of the referrals that the doctors had given Terry weren't in the area and weren't willing to see Brian. So unfortunately, they never got him evaluated for that. And Brian would also talk in his interrogation about how this actually wasn't his first time killing because he had actually killed 2 animals before. He said that the first animal he killed was on Halloween of 2018, and it was a black cat that he found. And I just want to give a quick trigger warning. There is very heavy animal abuse in the next story that I'm about to tell, the next 2 stories I'm about to tell. So please skip to this time frame if you don't want to listen to that, but I felt like I needed to put in a warning. So when Brian found this cat on Halloween of 2018, that's when he said that he had placed the cat into a bag, and when he did, he began beating the cat. And once he knew that the cat was dead, that's when he severed the cat's head and put the head into a wine cork box, and then he would take the cat's body and place that into a shoebox. Now, he also killed another animal in the past too. He said that one day he had found a groundhog, so he killed the groundhog and then he skinned the groundhog with hopes of making leather out of the skin, but was unfortunately not able to do so. And even Brian's teachers were interrogated by police, and they would say that Brian was a very big trouble child, but he was also very dark and sadistic and would try to manipulate people, try to get people worked up, but more in a psychological sense. There was this one incident at school where Brian had, quote, he was suspended from school for intentionally causing a panic attack in another student with PTSD, which caused the student to go home for the day. And then there was another time where Brian had attacked a random student with homemade mace. So as I said, Brian had murdered Warren on the night of February 27th, and he didn't get his car stuck in the river until the next day on February 28th. So what was Brian doing out there that late at night? So Brian did tell the truth. He said that, during that night, he actually did feel like he needed to go out and think, but he was actually going out there to think about the murder that he just committed about a mile away from there the night before. So he went out there, he went to the boat ramp, and he was genuinely there trying to, clear his head, figure things out. And then when he was about to leave, his car actually did get stuck, and he actually did need to call his parents. And then the bystander came by, and the bystander that the car that pulled over to help Brian and like give him his phone and stuff like that, because at this point Brian's phone was submerged in water and he couldn't use it. And so when this bystander had pulled off onto the side of the road, it was actually an old man and his grandson in the car. And his grandson went to school with Brian, and this grandson would be interrogated by police. And he said that at school, no one really liked Brian. And especially this grandson's best friend said that he rode the bus with Brian and said that Brian would always shout all of these slurs and all these really inappropriate comments. Brian would also make very vulgar sexual comments to women as well, again, just to get a reaction out of them. So the bystander said that when he got out the car, when he pulled over, his grandson stayed in the car, and as he left, he went up to Brian, and he just remembers Brian was pacing back and forth, and he just kept on repeating, "I'm so effed, I'm so effed." And this man was trying to calm Brian down. It's going to be okay, we're going to call someone, but Brian could not stop pacing back and forth. And that's when he finally said, "Do you want to use my phone? Do you want to call someone?" And that's when Brian called his parents. So after this, Brian was arrested, and his trial was actually in January of 2022, a year after the murder. At first, he did plead not guilty by reasons of insanity, and there was a very intense psychiatric evaluation, but what they believe is that Brian actually did know what he was doing at the time of the crime. Although Brian was very open, he was very, nonchalant about the whole thing, Brian also made it a point to talk about a lot of his favorite serial killers in his interrogation, and he always said that, he always saw himself getting arrested for murder or always ending up in a police station, and being interrogated for his murder. So it kind of seemed as if maybe this was a fantasy of his, or maybe this was a dream of his to live out his life like his favorite murderers did. And again, it was very clear that Brian knew what he was doing was wrong, because when the police had brought his car out of the water, he claimed that he didn't know where that blood came from. And then when it came to his parents asking, "Oh, that was just blood from a special effects class." And then when his dad confronted him about the wallet, he said, "Oh, I don't know where that came from. I have no clue." So it seemed like Brian was actively trying to cover up his tracks, especially with him putting on all of those layers of gloves, wearing a mask, washing his clothes when he got home. It seemed like he had planned this out thoroughly. And as I said, he had been going on night drives, he had been practicing on animals. This was something that was building up inside of him. So it wasn't really him and his mental disorders at the time of the crime. This was just building up over years and years and years. And so that's when Brian was found guilty for 1 count of evidence tampering, 2 counts of tampering with a deceased human body, and 1 count of murder in the 1st degree, and he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. And yeah, that is the end of today's case. Oh my God, I have been yapping so long. This whole side, I didn't even realize it's so dark in here. My God, I've just been talking so long. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are on YouTube, or if you are on Apple, Spotify, wherever you can find podcasts, make sure to rate it 5 stars, because that really helps me out a lot. And yeah, that is all from me. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day today. Make sure to be safe out there, and as always, I love you, I love you, I love you, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.